Good evening. Welcome to our special broadcast here on WION. I am Sana Khan. In a major success for the security forces in Jammu and Kashmir this morning, in an encounter in Pulwama district, the security forces neutralized Abu Dujana, the man who was known as the brainy militant. This is the most important success which the security forces have had after Hizbul Mujahideen terrorist Burhan Wani. But the intelligence agencies did not close on him through his terror activities and numerous plots that he had been hatching in the valley. It was something else that gave away Abu Dujana's exact location: his conversations with numerous girls over WhatsApp. There are also reports that he was allegedly involved with several women in Kashmir and had even married one of them. Officials describe him as a terror for women in the valley. Here's a short report.
More of only enjoying himself here. जिसको हम कहते हैं ना कि वो अयाशी कर रहा था यहाँ पर.
This is the new face of terror sweeping the Kashmir Valley. 26-year-old Abu Dujana, who was killed in a pitched gunfight with the security forces, was not just a separatist who was using terror in his fight for separatism, but has also been described as a debauch who was used to having a good time.
He was more of a nuisance. He was more involved in coercion and not many in terms of terrorist acts. So he was more of only enjoying himself here, जिसको हम कहते हैं ना कि वो अयाशी कर रहा था यहाँ पर. He was largely only a nuisance. That's the way I look at it. But the leadership of Lashkar-e-Tayiba has been affected, and we of course will now keep hunting for the other leaders in this area, and our aim is to keep clearing them out as soon as possible.
After the killing of the Hizbul Mujahideen commander Burhan Wani last year, Abu Dujana had emerged as the new face of terror. And unlike in the past, he had acquired a larger-than-life image aided by the social media, which had helped the terror outfits to get new roots.
Of late, he had become a larger-than-life personality on the social media. And that was leading to recruitment in the environment. And his killing will definitely ensure that the levels of recruitment in South Kashmir will come down slightly.
In the past, the terror outfits had used the propaganda machinery to highlight the excesses that were committed by the army in the valley. And the case of Abu Dujana now highlights that the terror outfits who tried to position themselves as the champions of the rights of the Kashmiris now stand exposed. The killing of the two terrorists, Abu Dujana and Arif Lilhari, is a major blow to the Lashkar-e-Tayiba. But as the burning embers cool after the encounter in the valley, the question on everyone's mind is, has terror in the valley become co-opted with debauchery? Bureau Report, WION.
Well, is this a new breed of terrorists emerging in Jammu and Kashmir? Let's talk about this. Joining me right now is WION's correspondent Ragavendra Rao. He is live with us. Ragavendra, thanks so much for joining us. Now, according to the police, the security forces, they suggest that they managed to pinpoint or zero in on his location via his phone. They intercepted his conversations with various women, also with his wife, and that's how they were able to close in on Abu Dujana. Give us a sense of what more are you learning about this man and how he was nabbed.
Well, Sana, the fact that the security agencies were able to zero in upon Abu Dujana, it's a result of a very well coordinated and very well calibrated effort between the army, the state police, as well as the intelligence agencies. From what we learned from our sources, Abu Dujana, he was frequenting South Kashmir very often on. As the police authorities in the state have been saying, he was there, he was meeting women, he was having a gala time. But yes, the mobile phone which he was using did in the end prove to be his Achilles heel. As you know, the security agencies were indeed monitoring the cell phone location, the location of the cell phone he was carrying, and also his whereabouts, his movements were being tracked for a long time. In fact, sources here in the MHA tell us that this person had been they'd narrowly missed him several times. In fact, he had escaped close to 10 to 12 times from being apprehended. And this time too, it was a result of human intelligence, some local input coming in towards the intelligence agencies, which helped them cordon off the area, zero in on the location with the help of the mobile phone location. And that is how this entire encounter, began.
Right, Ragavendra, do stay with me. Joining me on this discussion is also Rezaul Laskar. He's an associate editor with Hindustan Times. Reza, thanks so much for joining us. Let me start by asking you, in your understanding, what is making these young, well-educated boys take up this fight when they know that it's going to end in their death? What are the social reasons? What is the background? And it's not just one case. He is a bright, educated boy, and so are so many others who've been gunned down. This year alone, 52 terrorists have been gunned down by the security forces. Most of them, these young boys who have a good background, they're educated, and end up, they end up dead.
Well, I think if you look at it, it's also part of a larger worldwide sort of a phenomenon. It's not just in India. If you look at some of the people that the Islamic State has been able to attract, they have been educated people who have made extensive use of social networks, who are tech savvy. I think also primarily in Kashmir, it could be that a lot of these young men are incredibly frustrated with the way the situation has gone. There hasn't been much of a political breakthrough for whatever reasons. It could be the fomenting of trouble by Pakistan from across the border. It could be the Indian political establishment's response to the situation. But there seems to be a very great deal of frustration, and that could possibly be one of the reasons which is driving these people to this sort of action. I mean, that in no way condones what they're doing. Violence is not an answer, and that's also been proven around the world.
That's right. In fact, let's pause here for a bit and take a look, a recap of how the encounter unfolded in which this elusive terror mastermind was killed. Well, Abu Dujana had been frequenting the house of his wife and was believed to have other women friends as well. He always visited the women when it was dark, and having tracked the pattern, the police positioned watchers who waited silently around his wife's house for nearly 2 hours last night using sophisticated call intercepting technology. Security forces were able to zero in on the house he was in last night. At daybreak, when security forces finally arrived, Dujana was left inside the house with his aide Arif Lilhari. His wife and her family had been asked by forces to come out and run away to safety. Forces later blew up the house, taking no chances. Dujana had managed to give the security forces slip 5 times in the last 7 months, we are learning. In May, he escaped as the security forces were engaged with stone-throwing mobs. Dujana had plotted major attacks, at least 3 dozen, and was a key recruiter for Lashkar-e-Tayiba until he was sidelined recently, we're hearing. He was designated a category A++ terrorist. He carried a reward of 15 lakh rupees on his head, and he is described by the police as ruthless with his associates. He killed an aide, Yusuf Dar, suspecting that he was an informer. A terror commander since 2015, Dujana's term was ending and he was returning to Pakistan. He had been lying low for the last 3 to 4 months, the police say. The army and the police also said that he was mostly into debauchery more than terrorist activities. Well, Ragavendra, coming to you, these are details, of course, which the police has given out, which also suggests, as Reza was pointing out, that there is a sense of frustration in the youth in the valley, and perhaps all these things could be a result of this, the way they act. But also another question is, how is this looked at in Kashmir? You know what happened after Burhan Wani's death, but it's sort of a ripple effect, really. If you can give us a sense of how these operations or these killings are perceived by the locals over there. Are they considered heroes? Are they condemned for whatever they've done in the past? What is it?
The fact that a segment of the population in Jammu and Kashmir is supporting and in clandestine ways helping these terrorists survive, within their fold. Now, the very fact that, Dujana was also participating in the aftermath of Burhan Wani's killing, the protests which were taking place in Kashmir, there was intel to suggest that he was attending and was in fact a part of those mobs, those crowds which were protesting after Burhan Wani's death. He was also trying to incite more people against the establishment, the state government and the security agencies. And the fact that these youngsters, like Burhan Wani, for instance, the way they are being made poster boys for this so-called, struggle against the Indian state, that is what, appears to be one of the, strategies as far as these militant organizations are concerned. They are trying to rope in these people, young, educated people who are taking to arms, who are, conducting terror operations in the state, and you kill one Burhan Wani and there is Abu Dujana waiting to take his place. And as we are hearing right now, the Lashkar is already in the process of naming Dujana's replacement now that he has been killed. So it's a very it's a very well thought out strategy as far as terror groups like Lashkar are concerned. They want to lure these youngsters with the promise of heaven, money, call it whatever may you like, but yes, they are able to lure these youngsters who are taking to arms and are using it against their own people.
Absolutely. In fact, Reza, coming back to you, it's interesting that you brought out an analogy with the Islamic State and how they operate vis-a-vis what we're seeing in the valley at this point. It's fascinating if you look at history, if you look at European history, the mafia bosses, most of them, were nabbed visiting their girlfriends or their wives. But it's actually quite unthinkable for a person who is a jihadist, let's say 40, 45 years old, who would be this amateurish, so to speak, to be caught up in this situation. I mean, that's another story. He might be caught up visiting his mother or so, but this is, if you look, it's actually comparable to the mafia bosses, isn't it, in Europe?
Well, I would rather look at, again, to draw an analogy with the Islamic State. I mean, if you look at some of the people who have been involved in attacks by the Islamic State in the West, they aren't exactly poster boys for Islam. I mean, if you look at some of them have been drug users, some of them have had all sorts of affairs, and, so, I mean, it doesn't exactly surprise me to find, this person was possibly visiting somebody, a woman. I mean, these new youngsters who are joining these groups are from a different sort of a background. These are not, the people who are totally just radicalized in a madrasa or come from, a very rural background. Some of them are pretty urbanized. As we mentioned earlier, they are very tech savvy. So it's not, you're not dealing with the old sort of militant commanders anymore.
All right, Reza and Ragavendra, just stay back with me. I'm going to play out a soundbite of Kashmir Inspector General of Police Munir Khan and what he had to say after Abu Dujana was killed earlier today in the operation.
More a nuisance in the area by way of, I don't want to use those words. He had become an eyesore for everybody, especially the girls in the area. It was his sweet will now to enter any house and do whatever he wanted to do. Good riddance that way. I think people should relax, the girls, our sisters. They should relax now, that no such persons will be there to harass them anymore.
All right. Well, Ragavendra, coming back to you for an instant, if you hear Munir Khan over there, he seems to suggest that even though Abu Dujana might have been active previously, but right now his only focus was creating nuisance. Is that the sense that you're getting? Was he no longer carrying out crucial operations on behalf of Lashkar-e-Tayiba?
Well, it'll be a little premature to suggest that, though the J&K police is maintaining, this line, but the intelligence community is still not, just ruling out the possibility of Dujana being an active Lashkar member. Although, there have been reports that he had differences with the top leadership of Lashkar. He was, in talks with a breakaway faction of Lashkar and was in constant touch with them. But the intelligence community still believes that Dujana was a clear and present danger as far as Kashmir is concerned. And, his very presence in the valley, the fact that he was present for a reasonably long time, and he was roaming around in South Kashmir and several other areas and was being monitored and tracked. They do suspect that he was up to something. I mean, it would be rather premature to just dismiss Dujana's presence in the valley as, as saying that he was no longer an active Lashkar member.
Absolutely. In fact, certain reports say he had a major role to play in the attack on the Amarnath Yatra pilgrims as well. And that, of course, is a known fact that he used to be a key recruiter for the Lashkar-e-Tayiba. I'm pleased to welcome Mr. David Devdas. He's an Indian author, also an expert on Kashmir. He's joining us live from Srinagar, I believe. Thanks so much, Mr. Devdas, for joining us. Now, Rezaul Laskar is also there with us, so is my colleague Ragavendra, and we are talking about this new breed, perhaps, of terrorists who are most similar, as Reza was suggesting, to many of the fighters who fight for the Islamic State in various parts of the world. All right, I'm being told David Devdas will be joining us in a couple of moments from here on. But Reza, coming back to you, taking on from what you were saying earlier, how religiously focused, according to you, are these radicalized men? Give me a sense of that. Do you think they're extremely radicalized, or many of them not so much so?
Been able to track a few, Islamic State and other militant channels on Telegram and, other encrypted chats. And I find a lot of these people very confused. I mean, they're like parrots. Somebody puts out a message on some sort of Islamic, ideology, and they all just forward it like, other people forward WhatsApp messages that they get from their friends. I mean, there is no real attempt to study the real meaning of Islam. There is widespread acceptance of, jihadi philosophies that are, propagated by their ideologues. There is really no attempt to make a study of the basic tenets of Islam. If some commander or some ideologue puts out a message, they all just blindly jump on the bandwagon and start parroting the same thing. I mean, but at the same time, they seem to believe all this stuff, to the core of their souls. They think that this is the real Islamic ideology. So in that sense, yes, they are very radicalized.
Okay, Reza, do stay with me as we try to get in David Devdas. Here's a quick look at who exactly was Abu Dujana. Just 26 years old, Dujana infiltrated into the valley from Pakistan-occupied Kashmir somewhere around 2010. He was promoted as Lashkar-e-Tayiba commander after Lashkar chief Abu Qasim was killed by the security forces. In fact, security forces link Abu Dujana to various ambushes on BSF, CRP convoys in the valley, and he is believed to have made a strong base in South Kashmir and also has, according to reports, motivated youth to join militancy. In fact, let me try and go across to David one more time. David, thanks for joining us. If you can hear me, give us a sense, you're in Jammu and Kashmir, give us a sense of what's the ground mood. There have been a string of these operations in which young terrorists have been gunned down, most of them tech savvy. How do people perceive, their deaths when these guys who have considerable influence, they're very active on social media there, how do they see it?
I can hear you now, Sana. Yes, the reactions have been a little more muted in the last few weeks than they used to be about a year ago when, as you know, Burhan Wani's death caused a huge upsurge of demonstrations and agitations, which continued for a long time. Also, let us compare what happened today, Abu Dujana's death, with the death of his predecessor, the killing of his predecessor, Abu Qasim, in October, November, I think it was, 2015, right, when the forces had killed him. There was a huge upsurge even then, next only to what we saw when Burhan Wani was killed. Of course, when Burhan Wani was killed, the upsurge was much, much greater. But even when Abu Qasim was killed, who was the Lashkar commander, for whom Abu Dujana was a sort of security aide and used to be with him in the years preceding that, the reaction when Abu Qasim was killed was also such that about 3 districts of young people from 3 districts converged for his funeral, and there was some violence on the way back from his funeral. This time, it seems to me that Abu Dujana had become very popular after Burhan Wani's death, that is in the second half of last year. Right. But some of that sheen seems to have worn off. And actually, as a militant, Arif Dar, who was also killed with him, right, was perhaps more of success as far as the forces were concerned in terms of his current standing as a militant was concerned.
Okay, so there's, may not be that much of a support as we saw in case of others like Burhan Wani, but there is definitely not that much condemnation. Okay, right. Also, we were talking to Rezaul Laskar, and he said that, he was comparing these these young terrorists in Kashmir to those who are recruited by the Islamic State. They're tech savvy, their ideas are much similar. They seem to be quite frustrated. They're all very radicalized, but they don't have clear ideas about the religion or what their religion says. But how would you see them? How radicalized do you think they are? And how credible a threat is this generation really of terrorists that we're now seeing come up?
I would say that certainly there is some truth to that, but I would stop short of saying that they are all radicalized. There are many who are not. I think I would make a distinction between the millennial generation, that is young people who were born around the turn of the century, and those who were born in the 90s. It is the millennial generation who were predominant in the field during the demonstrations and the agitations last year. They are the ones who have been more radicalized, it seems to me. And after Zakir Musa made his statement that went viral in the second week of May, right, they have a large section, a very large section of this generation, that is teenagers and people in their pre-teens, have developed into a sort of fan following for Zakir Musa. Okay. And this is a trend that needs to be taken seriously. All right. But I would stop short of extending this to even that entire generation, and certainly to all Kashmiris by and large. Okay, all right. Of course, I didn't mean that, and neither did Reza. Reza, you want to add to that?
I think we also have to look at one very important issue as far as the Lashkar-e-Tayiba is concerned. It may be operating in Jammu and Kashmir, but the bosses are actually on the other side of the border, and virtually nothing has been done to shut down the organization in Pakistan. Till that happens, the Lashkar is going to remain a credible threat on our side of the border.
All right. And David, coming back to you, one last question on, before we wrap up, what is it? What is that thing, would you say, is making these, young kids join the fight? Can you pinpoint on some of the reasons, perhaps one or two? That's the motivating factor? I will, but before I say that, may I just add to what was just said? It's not only, it is of course based in Pakistan, but in the recent past, in the last month or so, we've had very credible evidence, very explicitly linking Lashkar with China as well, and I think that needs to be taken seriously too. In regard to your question, there are many factors, and I think we must keep in mind that this generation of current teenagers and those in their pre-teens were born around the time that the war on terror and all of those sorts of
global trends became very, very common, very prominent. They also have been molded by the internet much more than any previous generation. Please let us keep in mind that it was around March 2010 that the internet became far more prominently available to young people than it had been in the past. There were many more controls during the first decade of this century. It is after 2010 or since 2010 that the internet has seen a virtual explosion. And also let us remember televangelism and a whole lot of other kinds of messaging to this young generation have been very common and have been gaining ground, particularly in that period from around 2007 to about 5 or 6 years ago, but has continued to some extent thereafter.
All
so
right.
These are some of the factors. There are many other factors that but it's too short a time to go into all of them.
All right. Well, that's exactly the point here. We're extremely short on time at this point, but appreciate Rezaul Laskar and Mr. David Devdas for joining us here. I'd also like to thank my colleague Ragavendra for joining us with inputs there from Delhi. So clearly this is a story which we tried to bring out to our viewers with a different angle. This needs to be discussed more because there might be many other cases, such cases in the future, and this needs to be talked about. We need to know what is going wrong and where. That's it then. Time for me to take a short break. Do join us. We'll be back with the top stories in just a bit. This is me, Sana Khan, signing off.